Is it recording?
Yes.
All right, here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I am your host, Brian Snyder. And if you enjoy the show, please rate, subscribe, and like. It really helps. All right, here we are. I'm so excited. I'm here with deprofessionalized intellectual, activist, author, and dear friend, Gustavo Esteva. And we are continuing our conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Gustavo.
Hi, Brian. It's great to see you again.
It's wonderful to hear your voice. I'm just delighted that you're here and that we're here together to be able to have this conversation. And the focus of this is we're going to talk about policing and restorative justice. And Gustavo has a lot of experience in this subject, and he's going to share that with us now.
Great, Brian. Yes, I cannot really imagine what is life in the US. I can notice very well how it changed. The first time I was in the US in 1951, I think, that is almost 70 years ago. The idea of the police was really you saw a police and you feel protected,
Yeah.
and the police was really a kind of friend, a company, a really very effective protection. And I can see now that this is not the case any longer in the US. The last time I was there, perhaps 10 or 12 years ago, I saw many people afraid when they were seeing the police. Oh God, what's
Yeah,
happening?
especially people of color. And I think
Yes,
even back in the 50s, it was the same. I think it wasn't as publicized because there wasn't social media, there wasn't phones, recording video. So I think a lot of violence did happen, especially to people of color in the United States. It just wasn't known because there wasn't the communication,
yeah,
the multiple platforms for communication.
yeah. That is, in fact, the question today in Mexico. It's we know more and more now about the police. I know that the situation is different in Mexico for many different reasons, but I would like to explore our experience because perhaps the people in the US can derive some interesting lessons from what is happening in Mexico.
Yeah.
Um, for a long time, we have known that the police is not our friend, is not our protection, is has been always a problem for most of us, um, and particularly in the communities, particularly in the poor neighborhoods in the cities, the police is always a threat. And the current change is that today we have all the information, documented information, videos, all kind of documents showing the articulation, the combination of the police, the army, the cartels, the criminals, and the government. All are the same group. In a sense, they are not a criminal band in the sense that they're organized like a criminal band with a boss and full control or hierarchy, etc. That is part of the problem because there are many different groups and no one is in control, no one is responsible, but they are the same kind of thing. It is impossible now to draw a line saying this is the world of the institutions as this is the world of crime. They are the same. We have very serious experience. Just let's take the example last week in Pantelo in Chiapas. This was a group of communities in Chiapas that have been suffering the presence of all kinds of criminals, devastating the communities and raping women and killing people, even kids. And there are many people that have been forced to migrate, to abandon the land. This is associated with mining companies and other kind of things.
Now, when you say
Well,
Chiapas, you're talking about the Zapatista communities, correct?
it is not Zapatista community. It's next to Zapatista communities.
Okay.
Today what we are seeing is around the area of the Zapatistas. and more there are provocations and attacks, armed provocations. They are building, they are surrounding the Zapatistas with these kind of things. And sometimes they also include in the attacks Zapatista communities, provoking the Zapatistas for an armed reaction,
Now,
trying to, yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
please say now. You were saying something.
No, I was just going to say, I think I remember reading a statement in the 90s about Chase Manhattan Bank was saying, the biggest threat to progress in Chiapas and in terms of business is the Zapatistas. And they made that very clear. And so that makes sense that there are militias and organizations trying to cause violence and displacing people in order to get in there because that's an area of rich natural resources. There's uranium, coffee, um, what else?
Yes, but it is not only that. In fact, I think that the Zapatistas as are a pain in the ass for the dominant groups, including particularly the president,
Hmm.
because they represent a real alternative. They represent our alternative, our path,
Hmm.
our possibility of living in a different way. And that is very dangerous for the dominant groups because we are no longer ready to obey and accept the rules of the game. And at the very moment in which they are in trouble, capitalism is in trouble, all the corporations are in trouble, they have no longer the market, they cannot reproduce themselves in the same terms. When they are desperate for grabbing things and occupying things and dispossessing people of their things, and the Zapatistas represent a real option, a real alternative. And then for them, it's a dangerous example of what the people can do just by being united and aware and are angry and ready to be organized and to be together. This is something that we can discuss today because it's not only the Zapatistas, it is many other groups that are trying to resist, in which today it is not only the government, it's not only the police or the army or the corporations because they are using the cartels, the criminals. But let me conclude with example of Panteló. In Panteló, there were for years they were suffering this kind of aggression, and in the last months, in this year, the aggressions became unbearable, really unbearable. And then just the National Guard, that is the group created by the president, by the current president, to organize at the national level a new body of for security, for protection of the people.
Hmm.
The federal, apparently very good kind of people selected to be for the protection of the people. Then the National Guard and the army and the local police and the authorities were there doing nothing for years, for months. They have all kind. We have they used it. The people of Panteló used all the resources, legal resources. They presented denunciations. They presented their claims. Nothing happened, and they were suffering this domination of the criminals. And then 15 days ago, suddenly a group, an armed group, appeared in the community saying they were representing the community and they were ready to fight with the criminals and to put the criminals out of their communities. And then they came and they started to fight with the criminals and to put the criminals out of the community.
Now,
Then
where did they come from?
from the communities,
Okay. Okay.
it's not the Zapatistas, it's the communities themselves, people from the communities that they armed themselves, trained themselves, and prepared to react,
Hmm.
saying that there is no option. We cannot continue. This is unbearable. We need to do something.
Hmm.
Um, And then they organized themselves to do that something. And then they came to Pantalo and they started to do that for the protection of the people, to fight with the criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, Brian, thousands and thousands of soldiers of the National Guard came to the community. Meaning, in that moment, when it was the people themselves defending themselves from the criminals, then the National Guard came. That for us, it's an open, absolutely clear experience in which how the National Guard and the government and the police are protecting the criminals, not protecting the people.
Right.
And when the people react, they bring the army. They are now ready to do that very clearly in Chiapas. In Chiapas or Oaxaca, where the people are rebelling and trying to protect their land, to protect their lives, they are trying to resist mega projects or criminals or cartels or whatever. You have more um, members, more soldiers of the National Guard than any other part of the country.
Right.
In other parts of the country, they were not prepared like that. Perhaps you have heard a little about the history of Cheran. It's a community in Michoacan. It's another province far from Chiapas. They were suffering a kind of aggression by cartels and the people destroying their forests and destroying the community. Then, after a whole process of trying to bring to ask for the government, to ask protection from the government, to the usual thing, they organizing themselves. They killed a few criminals, and they warned the criminals that they will no longer accept them in the village
Mm-hmm.
and in their own forest. And they organized themselves for their self-government. And they have been doing amazing things, really amazing things, Brian. It is a beautiful story, the story of Cheran, how they come regenerating themselves and protected themselves without any police, any army, any and resisting against armed criminals. And another criminals don't dare to come to Cheran. Of course, the Cheran people are aware, are protected. They have all the time a kind of guard in the perimeter of the community to be aware that they can come back. They can be attacked. They are prepared to resist. Um, and this is, I am not inviting. I am not saying that this is the model. What the Zapatistas are doing is not to of course they have the Zapatista army still have their weapons and they have very good training, and in no time they can win in a battle with these criminals or other groups attacking them, but they don't want to fall in that kind of trap because they know that immediately if they react in an armed way to these criminals, they will invite the army to come,
Yeah.
and the army will have the pretext to invade the Zapatista communities that by law they cannot penetrate. Then that is why the Zapatistas are doing something else, and perhaps one of these days we need to talk about why they are now in Europe, what is happening with them in Europe, what is the meaning, the symbolic and the real meaning of the Zapatistas in Europe. That is for us the symbol and the reality of our uniting at the grassroots, listening to the other. They are going to listen. They are not going to create big organizations. It's not proletarians of the world united. It is not creating a big international organization. They are going to listen, to learn from each other, and to have how we can weave with the groups that are rebelling, that are resisting. It is beautiful to see how the presence of the Zapatistas in Europe have immediately united many groups that they were not talking with to each other, and now they are bound to host the Zapatistas, and they will continue this tapestry of groups. They will continue doing something in Europe. Is the Europe from below, the Europe organized, the Europe to resist, the Europe to protect the people that are now together to host the Zapatistas and to continue the struggle.
I'm
Um,
so sorry to interrupt. We didn't do something and I didn't remember to do it. Is my video okay? Am I in the
yes, yes,
frame?
yes,
Is
yes,
there too
yes,
much
very,
space or too
very well.
little?
No, no, it's okay. It is okay.
Okay.
You
And
you
you're
are
okay as well?
you are better than me. I am not.
Right.
You know how to put yourself in the right place. I don't know exactly. My face is too big in the screen, but it's okay.
If you tilt the if you push back the screen a little bit, it might help a little
Yes,
bit.
that's it. That is exactly what I
Okay.
did, and that's it.
Sorry, everybody. I usually do this in the beginning, but I didn't check. Excuse me. Um, yeah, I'm. We should definitely talk about that, but I wanted to focus on. I mean, I think there's a lot of I mean, anger on both sides. We have in the United States, we have Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, and it's people. Um, it's becoming very intense, and it has been for a long time. And I should mention that because you mentioned criminality and policing kind of together. I do have a family of law enforcement, and one of my family members said to me one time, and this person was on the police department and said, the line between a police officer and a criminal is razor thin.
Yeah, that
And
is it.
it's interesting to think about that. But I think in the context of our system in capitalism, in particular, that the policing system was designed to protect the wealthy and property owners and to protect their rights. And I'm not saying that there are not police officers that are virtuous and compassionate and kind. There was one point when I was, little. I think a lot of young men, in the United States, they want to be police officers because of watching movies and seeing heroes defeat evil, and that is why a lot of I think children, young boys, want to go into policing because they want to be the hero, they want to help people, and they have that sense of wanting to be of service. But then I think once somebody gets inside, then they end up being corrupted by a corrupt system. And um I think there's a lot of kind of trauma associated with becoming a police officer as well, which makes everything worse and fuels anger and aggression and so on. So, um, I can't really speak to it because I haven't been in law enforcement, but I do have family members that were, and there it is. I think there is truth in that the line between a police officer and a so-called criminal is razor thin.
And that is, I think, everywhere now in the whole world. Perhaps we can see the difference in China, but China is a very authoritarian state where everything is controlled by the government.
Right.
They don't need the police because they are controlling the people but by other means. Then we cannot use that as a reference, as a model. But in the rest of the world, that is happening everywhere. The mix of the police and the criminals, and I think this is the moment why we are trying to find example and inspiration in other traditions, like the traditions of indigenous people, when the idea of justice and the idea of what to do with the crime is entirely different. Perhaps I can remember, Brian, that years ago I was telling you the story of how the people in the communities, what is the usual reaction in the case of crimes. That if a person commits a worst crime, is killing another person, the reaction is not to put them in jail. And some people react thinking that they are violating their human rights because him, they tied this person to a tree. But it's not as punishment. It is not. It is just to for him to wait for the elders that will come with him and will try to talk with him in serenity. Uh, Once I heard the expression, they want to bring the soul back to their body because the expression was he was out of his mind. He was not doing the right thing, of course, but that was because he was out of his mind. Then we need to bring his mind back to this guy. And then they spend a few hours or days with him until he is back to normality. And now he's feeling well, feeling with his soul in its place. And then they untie him, and then everybody knows what will happen. First, he's free, totally free. There is no punishment, but he has the responsibility, the economic responsibility of the family of the dead person for the rest of his life. This is the guy that can go to the US to get a few dollars, and then he send the dollars to the two families, his own family and the family of the dead person. And the idea that he leave the community and it's totally free, and then still he fulfill his responsibility, give you a feeling of how deep is the communal feeling in that people. Meaning that for them, belonging to the community, fulfilling their place in the community, fulfilling their obligations, responsibilities for the community is more important than life itself or than any other thing. You are the community. You are not an individual that can have different interests. You are the community. Every eye is a commons. And then it is this feeling that creates the possibility of behaving in a different way. And I cannot see, Brian, any other thing more important than this, to be together, to create our commons. And perhaps some people in the US or some people in Mexico City don't have anything that they can call a community. They don't have a territory they can call their territory. They don't have a communal space, but they have friends, close friends. And with these very close friends, as Stilich said once, this is perhaps the only space left for us in the technological society for politics. With a group of friends, they can create that commons, that community that we need today to survive. And to bring what has been described as um, restorative justice that is absent in our cases. You know, there's this poet, Javier Sicilia, that suffered, his son was killed by a criminal, and then he became the hero, a national hero for a movement for justice, uh, bringing together the victims of all the crimes. We are today the most violent country on earth. We have still for years 100 deaths every day, 100 people assassinated every day. That is the situation in Mexico. And then there is a lot of victims. And the victims are no one is taking care of the victims. And then Javier Sicilia, the poet, after the suffering for the death of his son, that he loved very much, his son, 20 years old guy, then he was a symbol and a hero for this movement, the national movement. That one of the main things was what to do with the victims. and how we need to do with the victims. It's not only economic compensation or these kind of things. It is also recognition, the opportunity to hear. Um, I can't remember very well one moment in which Javier went to Michoacan, and then he convinced a woman to speak, and the woman started to speak first with a very trembling voice, and then she started to tell her story. Four of her sons have been killed,
Mm,
one after the other, and then she has been unable to tell anyone and to share with anyone the suffering, um, the suffering for her. And then she was saying, and one of the reasons for that I was in absolute silence, because that was my way for protecting my other three kids. She had originally seven kids, and then four of them have been killed, and she wanted to protect the other three in silence.
mm.
And then because of Javier, she finally spoke, and spoke in such a moving way. And then she became here. She started to go with Javier to other places and to tell the story and to be part of the organization of the victims, to create something like a different kind of restorative justice, that it is not just money that is the only reaction of the government. Oh, we will see to give some money to the victims. No, that is not just a problem. Of course part of the problem is money, but it is not that the problem cannot be reduced to a question of money. The question is, it's a, I, 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 I will not reduce this also to psychological restoration. It's not therapy. What they need is not just psychotherapy. It is to recover after that kind of situation. It is extremely difficult, and then they need love, and they need care, and they need to be again in a different situation in the community for real restorative justice to flourish.
Yeah,
This is what we need.
I think about this a lot because within the United States, we have it's a punitive justice system, and it really shows our psychology as Americans that there is, it's very, I guess, I don't know how to say it. It's good versus evil. So if you do something like commit a crime, you are thrown away. You're not deemed as a valuable, um, you know, a human being. You're thrown away. You're put in jail, and they call it rehabilitation, which it's not, because as statistics show that uh, you know uh, once inside, they become they deepen criminal behavior, and it traumatizes them even worse. And they're exploited usually because a lot of companies use prisons to manufacture products, and there's a large list of companies that use prisons to for manufacturing purposes. And so it's become a business and a system of exploitation and re-traumatization of someone who's already traumatized. And I've been reading the book "The Art of Loving" by Eric Fromm, and I was thinking about when you were talking about the indigenous tradition of tying someone to a tree if they've murdered someone. The idea is that if somebody does something like that, an act like murder, it's because they're so angry and so enraged, and the anger is just a surface thing. What's underneath is, and this is what Fromm talks about, is there's anxiety, there's fear, and it's so extreme that it's externalized and projected onto another person, because this person is so scared, so afraid, so full of anxiety and fear, and they do that and commit murder or something like that. And I think about how it's our psychology of that. Basically, the fundamental idea is that, especially in the United States, that human beings are not valued, and that they, if they commit a crime, it's they're evil, deemed evil. And I think it goes back to also religious kind of conditioning and so on. But and there is no looking at the root causes of violence and suffering. And that's why restorative justice is so important, because it deems human beings as valuable, that even if they commit a so-called crime or violence, there's a reason for it. And and that's the thing we don't do in the United States. We don't look at the root causes of why people do things, commit violence, or whatever it may be. And so that's the fundamental things. We don't look at the root cause. We just look at the surface effects of violence.
And also, well, you know better than me that you represent less than 4% of the population on Earth, but you have 25% of the prisoners on Earth.
Right. Right. And
You-
and I mean, I think it's because we have private prisons, and, it's for profit. So it incentivizes putting people in jail, and which most of the people are in jail are people of color. And so then you added the systemic racism fact on top of that. So there's this, and it's all of this is tied to keep the capitalist system moving forward. It's all for profit. It's not about creating a loving and peaceful society. And that's why I really I'm appreciating this discussion, because restorative justice is so important, because it's about restoring community, restoring you know the healing process of people that have suffered loss, and also creating value for the people that have enacted violence upon others, is that they can redeem themselves through service, through committing their life to helping those that they've inflicted pain and suffering upon.
and this is a very very important. I think it is central point. One cannot really understand why you continue having that system that obviously is not functioning. It's not even functioning for keeping capitalism forward. It's not going forward. It's going to the abyss. It is falling apart.
Right,
The
right.
system is not. It's not in full prosperity. It's not
Well, I mean,
not good.
it
But
shows that like there's this. I think when somebody has so much greed, that the desire that desire to fill a void with wealth and power that cannot be filled ever, that desire is so cannibalistic and self-destructive that it is ultimately it's designed to destroy itself.
yes,
And
yes, that is the point. It is destroying itself. It is committing suicide. It was uh, finally um, this Soros, the speculator of Wall Street, was right when in the 90s he was saying they are killing the goods of the golden eggs. They are committing suicide. These market fundamentalists, the neoliberals, etc., they were destroying capitalism. Not only they were committing suicide in a very real way, and they are creating a horrible kind of society. Yes, they are accumulating more money than ever in fewer hands than ever, but still without with what meaning? Without they are not creating a different kind of society. The promises of capitalism of a different kind of society are over. We can no longer believe in them. Any person can really believe in those old promises of capitalism. But uh, but let's go back to our point, Brian. What to do with the crime? Let me tell you the story that for me it's very difficult to even understand it and to feel. Um, you remember this horrible crime massacre of Acteal,
mhm.
when 43 people, basically women and children, were killed in a very horrible way um, by a group of killers.
It was a paramilitary group, right?
Yes, well,
Yeah.
not exactly a paramilitary group. It was people, normal people becoming killers.
Okay.
It was not an organized group of killers. but it was people that were hired and supported to do these kind of things.
Hmm.
Um, and then I was visiting one person of Factial that was at that moment one of the leaders of the organization. And I was talking with him to talk with him about how he was feeling because in the massacre they killed his wife and his daughter. And I knew that there was a lot of suffering. And I was asking him how he was doing. And then he told me, well, Gustavo, the Christian pardon was not so difficult. That was something that many of those were able to do quickly. And that was really healing. That helped us to heal.
You're talking
But
about
what,
forgiving those that,
yes,
yeah.
that is in the Christian tradition,
Hmm.
forgiving someone that did to you, hurted you, or whatever. That is something that we need to do every day, all the time, with the people that hurt us in whatever way. In your family, with your son, with whatever, you need to be aware that we need to be that, to be compassionate, to forgive, because we need to be asked for forgiveness, because we are also doing things that are not right, and then we are committing mistakes, and then we need forgiveness. We need forgiveness as part of our daily life, a part of our art of living. But let me go beyond that, because what this guy told me immediately was really very puzzling. He told me, you know what is very difficult, Gustavo? It's conciliation. What I said? Yes, the killers are people living in the next village. We know them. We know who they are. We need to reestablish our relations with them, friendly
Through
relations,
reconciliation.
reconciliation
Yeah.
between the two communities. And he explained it to me, if we are full of rage, if we don't organize our reconciliation with them, we will inherit this rage to the next generation, and this will go forever. And then we will be continue fighting between these two communities. We, those that are suffering the most, we need to process our pain, our suffering, and find ways for the reconciliation. It is in my generation that we need to fix this problem. Of course, we want justice in the sense that we know who paid them to do this, who was interested, what is the people in the government, what is the people up there that were behind these crimes. But with these people, the killers that are living in the next community, what we want is reconciliation. That is very difficult to understand. That is, very, of course, very difficult to do. Not only the Christian forgiveness, but reconciliation to reestablish the relation between the two communities, friendly relations, finding things in common. It is, of course, very challenging. And this is exactly what they are doing. And this is exactly when they are trying to punish the people of Acteal. They are attacking the people of Acteal because they also represent a different kind of example today, like the Zapatistas. They just killed a person that was a president of the organization of Las Abejas, the bees, that is closed, that includes the people of Acteal and other communities there. And then we are talking about something that is radically different, but includes one very important element, that you're not asking for justice up there, someone up there that we will apply justice, but we are involved in the process of justice. That we need to involve ourselves in protections, in justice, in trying to recuperate. um, a way of life, a way of life that should be based in love and friendship. This may look utopian, but it is the only way out of the current mess, Brian. I cannot see any other way. We are in the one of the worst moments in the human history, for the level of violence, for the level of destruction, what we have been doing to Mother Earth, what we continue doing to Mother Earth, to nature. You are now suffering in California and in all the United States and Canada. All this wave of heat and the fires and all these kind of things, that is a consequence of the climate collapse. What we did, what we continue doing to Mother Earth. And the situation will be worse and worse. And we need to stop destroying our habitat. We need to stop destroying the social fabric. We need to stop killing each other. And the only path is not a new leader, a new kind of social system, a new kind. Of course, we need to dismantle capitalism, but dismantle capitalism in our hands, in our behavior, in what we do every day.
Well, let me ask you this. I'll talk from a personal perspective. I'm going through my own suffering, and because of my vision loss, and also my regret of how I spent my life not pursuing the things I loved. I gave them up, and I have an enormous amount of regret. And I'm experiencing the loss of my perception of reality as it has been for most of my life, and I'm now entering the final stages. I'll admit that I'm in an enormous amount of pain, and I through that I sometimes externalize my pain through anger or whatever, and I think about that on a larger scale. Now, mine is in a sense, it's different, but um, I think about everybody else, people that are losing their employment, having family issues, which everybody's having, the stress of that, loss from deaths related to many, many different types of things, poverty, everything, disease, and what I'm concerned about is, especially within the United States, but I mean, it applies to everywhere, is that when people are suffering and they're experiencing enormous amounts of pain, they have two paths. Either they'll externalize it and project their pain on others with anger or violence, or they have another path of becoming more loving, compassionate, and empathetic and kind. So I feel like within the United States, we're having enormous amounts of rage and anger. And even in my own community, a few months ago, I mean, it was quite a while ago now, but we had a Black Lives Matter march that went through downtown Nevada City. And then they were confronted by basically what they're called themselves patriots, white men, angry white men, and these men just started pushing and shoving people, women, um, children, and it became violent. And they started chasing people, and it really got out of control. And so you have um, people divided with anger and rage, and my concern is, uh, how can we unite and come together with love and empathy and compassion when people are experiencing so much pain? And I think about it with just my own situation. I'm trying desperately to become a more loving, empathetic, compassionate, gentle person, and it is very, very difficult. And so, I mean, that's the question: is how do we develop our empathy and capacity for peace building when we're experiencing so much pain?
Of course, Brian. That I can understand very, very, very well. And first, I think our only reaction first should come from awareness that where we are. We are in the midst of a war. In the case of the United States, but it is not only in the United States. Part of the problem is the war, not only from those up there, the dominant groups, dispossessing the people and organizing this aggression against the people, but also the people down there, what you just described. The patriots were not someone paying them or someone giving them the instruction to attack the group of blacks. It is the profound racism that exists in the United States, and people trying to express the rage they feel because of their own oppression, their own problems, their own pain, their own suffering, expressing it with rage and attacking others. And in this case, clearly attacked others with the racist attitude. Well, that is the real problem. First, it is full awareness that we are in the midst of a war, and in the war you cannot be neutral, and you if you pretend to be neutral, you are collaborating with your enemy.
It's like Howard
But
Zinn
the
said, you can't be neutral on a moving train.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then now the point is that it is not to give the assassins or the violent people a soup of their own chocolate. It's not to give them back the same kind of rage, the same kind of violence that they're imposing on you. Of course, this is very challenging, but it is exactly what we need to do. What we need to do to offering a different kind of reaction. Then instead of more violence, instead more hate, instead of hating them for what they are doing, we need to create the conditions for a different kind of behavior. And I'm not offering saying this is easy or we have an immediate solution. It will be immensely difficult. But at the same time, Brian, I am very hopeful because I can see in Mexico or the US a lot of people ready to react in the right way. It's not that you alone can deal with this, Brian. It's clear. Your own suffering, your own pain, it is not something that you need to deal with a therapist or you need to deal just with your compañera or your son. It is not just something that you can process alone. It is with a different kind of interaction with other people in which you can really heal from that pain that you are suffering. And you are seeing this very well. Of course, I can see that your loss is very serious and that many people can lose their minds if they are losing uh, eyes and ears, if they can no longer live their life they have been living for a long time.
Yeah,
I
I
know
lose
that it
my mind a little bit each day, but but I'm
yes,
okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm working through it. But the thing is, I think about how difficult it is for myself to because there's so much programming that I've experienced through school, through our media, entertainment. There's a propaganda of dealing with our problems with violence and anger, and projecting that anger onto others, and it's through our it's very, I mean, it's propagated through every aspect of American life, and it goes from schools, it goes from like I said, into the media, and entertainment. It's pervasive through everything. That there isn't. I guess my friend talks a lot about peace literacy. Excuse me. Um, there isn't any peace literacy in our discourse here.
no. And the question is, perhaps one of these days we will talk more about peace, and then how it is a problematic word, and then we need to talk about pieces, etc. But I would I prefer to talk about love. Um, what is needed, what we really need is love.
Mhm.
It's trying to find a way to have loving relationships with the others, including the so-called enemies. That is the only way to stop this war, Brian. I don't see any other possibility. It is not a problem expropriation or the programs of Mr. Biden for infrastructure of reestablishing some employment. No, no, no. That's not a real solution about what you have today in the United States. That you are they are talking that you are already in something like the civil war of the 19th century. Well, I am afraid that it is worse than that. That uh, it is not two armies confronting each other. It is worse than that. It is real people, real men and women, normal, ordinary men and women, expressing violence and rage and doing horrible things against each other. You have already
Every
that
day in the
every day,
stores. Yeah. At the gas
everywhere,
stations. Yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere, and feeling a kind of obsession or compulsion to do that. That they cannot live without doing that. What
On
to do with
social
them?
media as well.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. That is it. That is the reality. That is the reality to confront. What to do to punish them, to put them in jail, to apply similar violence to them, to prepare yourself and then accumulate weapons to organize yourself for the fight. Uh, that that is the horror that we already have. Then it is a question of how to escape from that horror. And the way to escape is not more police, it's not more jails, it's not more punishment, but exactly the opposite. It is what we need to reduce, it's to eliminate, is the line of punishment. Is what we need to do, it's trying to understand why they are reacting that way, why they cannot avoid that kind of reaction, and seeing that the horror is in what was the American dream. It's the American way of life. It's how you were raised, how you were educated, how you were shaped, programmed. To, I can see something that is for me fascinating. Brian, during my whole life, my experience with most of the American people was that there was a kind of arrogance in the relation, even with friends, with people close to me. There was always a kind of arrogance, saying, "Well, I am American," and then that meaning we have the greatest society on earth. We are the most powerful, the richest, and we have the best society on earth. During the last years, particularly after Mr. Trump and all this happening in the last 10 years in America, what I find in many American friends is humility and even shame. One friend was telling me the other day, I don't feel well for being American. It's a kind of shame being American now that we know what kind of society we have created. That is very healthy, very good. That is one very solid step in the right direction. Is
But
to have full awareness of what you have created.
it can also be shame can also be paralyzing too and lead to depression and um,
Yes,
not
yes,
doing anything at all. So
of
there is
course.
a balance though, right?
Yes, yes, of course. After the shames, how we can address that, and that means address that means how we can uh, go to the root of the problem. What is you were saying this at the beginning of our conversation today? How we go to the root? putting people in jail is not going to the root of the problem. It creates aggravate the problem instead of dealing with the problem. Uh, what is the root? How we are creating more and more rage in the people. How we continue creating this rage. How I think we need to explore that very deep. Let me say that in a very different context, I was raised. My home was a place for extreme racism by a misogynist father that had a feeling of a kind of aristocracy. And as I have told you, shared with you many times, my indigenous, my Zapotec grandmother could not enter into my house through the front door because she was an Indian. And my mother assuming that the best thing that she could do for her children was to clearly separate us from our indigenous ancestry. That is racism at home,
Hmm.
and a horrible racism. And the problem, I am bringing this to our conversation because the main problem was that was normal for all of us, that we assumed that racist behavior. Of course, we adored with the children, adored our grandmother, and our grandmother was a fantastic person, but the racism was inside us and was normal. And then the good thing was to translate that into development. That is, oh, we need to help these poor Indians for them to become like us. But that was another form of racism. That was not a part out of racism, but was another expression of colonialism. Let's develop them for them to become like us, suppressing their own culture, suppressing their own way of being. But what I'm trying to say is that for me it was many years, many years, and many different experience to escape from that condition of my internal racism, assuming the that way of being of my father, the kind of situation that I have at home. Well, this has been the norm in the United States. That has been normality. You were saying that in the 50s, the black people were already suffering attacks by the police. Yes, that has been the case. Always, always. In the whole history of the United States, the black people have been suffering that kind of oppression, and they have internalized that oppression. And they have those feelings of feeling inferior because they have been treated as inferior all the time in every place. Yes, that is the problem. That is to acknowledge the kind of problem you have there. And we have here with indigenous people.
How did you become aware and start to d- confront that internalized racism?
My feeling, I don't have a clear answer, but my main hypothesis is how that taught me the way out. Because they, even seeing my real racism with a good face or bad face, in whatever way, they were behaving in a different way. They were not reacting. They were not a mirror of my behavior, but the opposite. And demonstrating in the real behavior, in the real life, their amazing talents and their amazing capacity and their amazing way of loving the other, connecting with each other. And then just experiencing that kind of situation in indigenous communities, uh, being hosted by people of indigenous communities after 500 years of abuses by people like me, then that was, I think, the way I one day, one morning, I opened my eyes and I was a different person because of that concrete experience, seeing an alternative behavior, seeing an expression of in spite of the oppression in spite of suffering racism, how they can express themselves in a different way.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. Talking about hatred and racism, and I'm paraphrasing. It's not exact, but he says men hate each other because they fear each other, because they don't understand each other, because they don't communicate with each other, because they are divided.
Yeah. That is what we need to erase, that division, that antagonism, even with the assassins, even with the patriots, even with these people attacking us, attacking you, attacking all the kind of things that we love and care. Yes, instead of hating them, instead of reproducing this hate and this element of competition that is really in very deep in the construction of an American, you need to be a competitive individual and win. You need to be the winner. You must not be classified among the losers. Then that is very strong inside every person in America. Then we need to dissolve that.
Yeah,
We need
and it comes to mind, and I'd like to continue this discussion. In a way, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been meaning to mention this to you, but I've been trying to find a way to have discussions with people where the language is not divisive. It's finding ways to get at the issues that we are trying to confront, the problems that are destructive, without using terms that shut people off or put walls up. Because I mean, I use the term capitalism all the time, but somebody, when they hear it in the context of how I use it, especially if they're more conservative, they're not going to like it. They're going to shut down and get upset and say, well, capitalism works. It's brought me a very comfortable life. Whoever, a conservative person might say something like that. And so I'm trying to understand about how to talk to people in a way to say, okay, here's the problem. Um, is how what you believe, is that creating um, love, compassion, empathy, unity, or is it creating uh, walls that are destructive, that are dividing us? And I'm not, I'm not sure how to approach it. I do believe that humor is one way, and that's why I love George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and so many other comedians. Is because if you can make somebody laugh, it opens the door to listening. And Trevor Noah, who lived in South Africa, he has a wonderful story about his grandfather and him being in a riot during apartheid. And this police officer on a horse came up to him and was going to start beating him, but his grandfather made a joke about the horse, and the police officer laughed and didn't hurt him, and they both started laughing, and it brought them together. And I think about that all the time, is how can we use language in a way that doesn't destroy each other? And I think here in the United States, especially, excuse me, United States, especially with social media, all it is destructive language.
yes, but now you need to know, Brian, that now you are already an expert in doing the right kind of things. This series of conversation, what you have organized, these programs are a very good example on how you deal with them, because you deal with them with humor and with the right language, with the right attitude. Uh, you are you are expressing, you are transforming your terrible pain and suffering and your anger into the opposite. What you are doing
Sometimes
in this way is love. It's pure love,
sometimes I
Brian.
mean I still fall back. I'm still trying to rewire this American brain that has been in many ways destructive to myself, and mostly myself, and mostly putting up walls that keep people away from me and loving me, and me loving them as well. And so it's
Because
been a
you are
problem, but
human. Because you are human. No human is perfect. And then we all the time commit mistakes and then we fall back in our problems. Yes, yes, all of us. That is, thanks God you are not God. You are my,
right, right.
yes.
Well, thank you.
Apparently, we are out of time, Brian, but really, we need to continue our conversation. I love these conversations with you. Please invite me more to continue our discussions. We have one now about the art of dying. That is something that we need to discuss, but we need to continue this basic point of how we transform rage into love.
All right. So I'll make a note of both of those things. So the next one we'll talk about the art of dying, and then the one after that we'll talk about transforming rage into love.
What to do with our rage?
Right. Right. Well, thank you so much, my dear friend. I deeply appreciate you being here with me, and I love hearing your voice as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see together. Let's see each other more often.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. This was The Blind Man in Black. I am your host, Brian Snyder. Once again, if you like the show, please rate, subscribe, review on YouTube or Apple Podcast, and please share. It really helps. And you can go to blindmaninblack.com. And thank you once again, Gustavo Esteva. Deeply appreciate you and everything you do and everything you've done for me. I love you very much. And let's continue the conversation. And now we are going to have our awkward ending. And let me just, I need to turn my screen reader back on so I can hear what's happening. I think it worked. Are you still there?
Yes, and it's still recording.
Uh-oh, my screen reader didn't come back on. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. Now I can do it. All right, here we go. Thank you. Abrazos.
Aplausos.